Hi there, my name is Abu and welcome to my channel. In this tutorial, I will introduce you to JavaScript. So if you're gonna do web application development or mobile application development, it's crucial that you at least understand the basics of JavaScript. So in this tutorial, I will take you from the very beginning of JavaScript, and along the way, I will show you both the old syntax and the modern syntax of writing JavaScript code. And by the end of this tutorial, you should be comfortable with JavaScript. So without wasting any time, let's jump in and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our environment. In this tutorial, I will use Microsoft's VS Code, and I will highly suggest that you use the same if you want to follow along. So when you go to Google, just type in VS Code and you can download VS Code from their official website. It's for free, so just download this. I already have VS Code installed on my computer. So once you've downloaded it and installed it, you need to add an extension called Live Server, and this is what is going to make our computer act as our local server, so that when we want to run our code, it can run in our browsers. I have this installed already, so you can go ahead and install it. And as you can see, it's very popular. It has about 20 million downloads already. So as you must have guessed, we are going to create a file and we're going to call it index.html. because we want this to run in our browser. And we would now want to start writing our code. Obviously, we would start by saying HTML and then continue and type our body. But VS Code can give us this entire boilerplate code. So all you have to do is press Shift and press the number 1, and you'll see the Emmet abbreviation, and just press the tab button, and we have the whole boilerplate code for our HTML. So in the body, I can have an h1 tag, for example, and I'll say introduction to JavaScript, and I'll save that. Now this is where you want to use your live server extension that you just installed. So right click on index.html and open with live server. And as you can see, the server opens up and I have introduction to JavaScript. But where are we going to see our JavaScript code? Where are we going to run it? And we are going to run it in the console. So still in our body tag, we can write a script. So this script is like the JavaScript script. And as you must have guessed, we're going to have it in the console. So in JavaScript, we have a method called console, and it has a few properties. As you can see, there are so many. But the property that we want, as you must have guessed, is the log property, because we want to log to our console. So this log property, it takes anything that you want to put here. So for now, I'll just say hello world and I'll save it. And back to my browser, where do we find the console? So you can right click and inspect this page, and you should see some elements here, but what we are interested in is the console. So it's right here. You can hit on console and you should see hello world. So you can put anything you want in this log. You can say 2 + 2, and when I save it back to my browser, I should see 4 as the result. So it just logs anything you give it to the console. So this is how we're going to write our JavaScript code, and we'll see the output in the console of our browser. Back to VS Code, like I said, we can put anything we want in here in the console, but this is not a good way of arranging our programs. In programming, there's what is called single responsibility principle, meaning that any module or any file should have one responsibility. So this file should be responsible for displaying this content to the browser, but we need to have another module that will handle this console.log and all our JavaScript code. So back to the files, open another file here. You can call it anything. I'll just call mine script.js. And in here, I will just copy this console.log statement, and I'll cut it from here and come to script and paste it here. And I'll save it there. And now you're going to ask me, but Abu, how will this run in our browser then? Now this script tag has a property called source, src, and this source property takes a file or a module that you want to be scripted and bundled with this HTML file, and that's going to be taken by the browser. So in the source, we have to just point to that file. So in this case, I'll use a dot, meaning the same folder, and /, and it should display for you the two files that are in that folder. And as you might have guessed, the file is script.js. So I'll press enter and select the script.js, and I save this. And if I go back to my browser, I should see the same output. If I reload, the output should be the same, but this time this console.log is coming from this script.js. Let me show you. Let's change this to something like hello, and I save this. In my browser, I should see hello. And you might have guessed now that we don't actually need to open this HTML anymore. So I can actually close this, and our main focus is going to be on this script.js file. That's where we're going to write our entire JavaScript code, and we will learn from the script. So I'll just set up my VS Code and my browser side by side, so that this way, whatever I do over here, I can straight away see it on the console over here. I don't need to go jumping back and forth between my VS Code and my browser. And I hope you're done setting up your coding environment, and let's continue to the fun part. The fun in JavaScript starts with variables. Variables are simply a way of storing data in memory. For example, I want to store the value 3 in memory. I could use this value 3, but it's easier to say, okay, I have an integer, for example, 3, and I want to use it in 1,000 places. Other than writing the number 3, I could write that specific integer. For example, a boy has an age 5. And every time we want to use the age of this boy, instead of saying 555, we can just use the name that we have given to store this number. So we initialize variables in JavaScript using the keyword var for variable. So I'll call it boy equal to 5. Remember to terminate. And now this number 5 is in memory, but if we want to use this number 5, we can use the word boy, and this number 5 is going to be called. So for example, I can console.log boy, and when I save this, I should see 5. So in the sense, I could have as well just typed here 5 and save it. I will still see 5. But in programming, if you have 5s in 1,000 places, and let's say for example, this boy's age changed to 6. So if you have 1,000 places you use that value 5, you have to change 1,000 times the value of this boy. For example, Shift and Alt and down arrow, I can make copies of this console.log, and I can select 5 and hit Control D, and anything that has the word 5 on it is going to be selected, and I will write here boy, and I will save it. So assuming these are like 1,000 of them, Shift and Alt and down key, let me just add a few more lines of the word boy just to make my point. So we have many places we have used the value boy, and we know this boy's age is 5. So assuming the value of this boy changes to 6, all I'll need to do is go back to where I initialized the value boy, and I'll change this to 6. And when I save this, you can see everywhere else I've used the keyword boy has changed to 6. Now, let me just leave only the first console, and I'll change this back to 5, and Shift and Alt and down. So assuming this boy's age changed to 6, let me save this, and you'll see 5 all over the console output. But assuming this boy's age changed to 6, so you can imagine I will have to do this and change this to 6, and the next one change this to 6, and the next one change this to 6, and the next one change to 6. So I'm just going to skip this one just to make my point, and I'll change this to 6, and I'll change this to 6, and I'll change this. I mean, you can see, even just watching this video alone, I'm sure you must be feeling already tired of it. So when you save it, there are so many errors that can happen. I changed this one to 6, and there's a 5 here that I skipped, and as you can see, this is very tedious. So variables help us with this situation. This is how we initialize variables. So variable boy, var, equals to 6, and I can just call boy like that, and I'll save it. So anywhere I want to use this boy's age, I'll just use the word boy. I don't need to use the number 6. And you can do anything you want with this. So I can say boy plus 12 or 20, and if you see 26, or boy times boy's age, maybe times 20 again. You should see the output over here. So you can do whatever mathematical operation you want with this word boy. Or for instance, this boy has a name. The boy is called Abu. So save this. I should see Abu on the console. Again, if you use this many times, and other than writing Abu up here, in the same sense, anywhere that I want to use the word Abu or the boy's age, I'll just use the keyword boy. So still on boy, let me just put this back and say the boy's age is 5. What if I want to change the value of this boy without changing this first line here? The next time I'm going to use the word boy, I can change its value. Let me show you. So on the next line, I can say boy is now 6 years of age. So when I save this, I should see 6. This means that JavaScript is a sequential programming language. It will run the first line and run the next line and run the other line. So initially the boy's age is 5, but JavaScript checks and says, okay, the boy's age has changed to 6. So the new value of boy in memory is going to be 6, not 5. That's why you see on the console, we have 6. So I could continue and say, no, boy's age now is 7. And when I save this, you should see 7. So I have changed the value of this boy from 5 2 times to 6 and then to 7. So in JavaScript, it's allowed, you can change the value of your variables. But in the end, this is an old way of initializing JavaScript variables. So the new way of initializing JavaScript variables, we have 2 ways. The first one is const. As you must have guessed, it means constant. So constant girl equals to 10. So this girl is 10 years of age. As you must have guessed, I'll come down to the console because we want to see the girl's age, and I will change it to 10. And when I save it, I will see console.log 10. Like I said before, the value of boy, we could change this variable of boy to something else on the next line. But with constant, you cannot change the value of a constant. For example, we have girl, and if I came to the next line and said girl equals to maybe 11, the girl's age has changed. When I save this, I should see an error. It's telling me assignment to constant variable, there's an error to it, meaning that a constant, that value does not change. We cannot change that value of the age of the girl. So I will remove this line so that I don't have this error anymore. If we want to change the value of this variable, there's a modern keyword, we call it let. So let Abu be equal to 12. If I console.log Abu here on the console, I should see 12. But let's assume it's a year later and Abu's age has changed. So Abu equals to 13. So when I save this, I should see 13. So if there's some values that you never want to change, you should use const. But if you have other variables that you want to change at some point when you're writing your program, then you should use the let. So this var keyword is barely used anymore, I would say. In most modern JavaScript applications, you will not see the var keyword, and you should see either const or let. So someone might ask, okay, Abu, what happens if you create a variable but you do not initialize it? What happens? Let's see. So if we var, this is our variable, I'm going to call it Mary, but we don't initialize it. We just terminate the line from there. And then we call Mary down here. What do you think is going to give us on the console? Let's see. So we save this and we will see undefined. So this means that any variable, its default value is undefined. But this rule doesn't apply to const, as you will see. So const Allen, and when we terminate, even before terminating, we see a const declarations must be initialized. There's already an error it's giving us even before calling Allen. So let's try calling Allen and you see. So when we save this, we should see an error, missing initializer. Anytime we declare a variable with a const keyword, we have to initialize it. Otherwise, it's gonna give us an error. What happens when we use let? So let Musa, and then let's call Musa. What do you think the output is gonna be? So we're gonna save this, and the output is going to be undefined. Still with variables, JavaScript has rules that govern how you name your variables. So you cannot use the JavaScript reserved keywords. JavaScript has many reserved keywords like let, const, for. Some of these keywords we will see as we go along with this tutorial. So you can just Google JavaScript reserved keywords. It should show you a list of all the JavaScript keywords. So the next rule is cannot start with a number. For example, if I put here 10, already you can see there's an error that is being thrown to us. So we cannot start with the number when we are naming our variables. And variables in JavaScript are case sensitive, meaning that if we have a Musa up here and we have another Musa with a capital M, these are two different variables. They are not the same. So if I said Musa equal to 10 and Musa equal to 12, these are different variables in JavaScript. So I'm going to log both of them, and then I log also Musa. When I save this, I should see 10 and 12. So JavaScript is case sensitive when you're naming your variables. And finally, this is just logic. Your variables should have meaning. So as your application grows, let's say you want to initialize a bunch of colors. I will say colors. Red. Let's assume somebody else calls their colors CLRS equals to blue. Which is a better way of naming a variable? Before we go to the next part, you must have realized and asked, okay, Abu, why are you putting these double forward slashes before you write? So in every programming language, there's what we call commenting your code. So a comment in JavaScript, you write comments using the two double forward slash. When the compiler is running this code and it notices the double forward slash, it ignores that line of code. For example, we have Musa and Musa. If I commented out one of them, like this one, and I put before the line of code, double slash, and you can see VS Code grays it out, and I save this, it's going to tell me Musa is not defined. That means the compiler did not compile this line of code. It ignored this line of code. So this is how you comment in JavaScript. Let's imagine you have written your code, thousands and thousands of lines, and you don't have any comment whatsoever anywhere. At some point, you're going to run into a situation whereby you don't remember what that specific part of your code does. So it's important to comment your code. Let's move on to the next part. So the next thing we're going to look at in JavaScript is called types. And we have two types in JavaScript. We have the primitive types and we have the reference types. As you must have guessed, we will start with the primitive types. In primitive types, we have the strings and then we have the Boolean. Now the Boolean is like true or false. The strings are, for example, the blue in quotation marks. Anything in a quotation mark is a string. And then we have a number. For example, up here we had 13, we had 10. These are numbers. And then we also have undefined and we also have null. We used most of the primitive types already. And this Boolean true or false will also bring us to conditional operators. For example, if I said const Sophie equal to 10, that is Sophie's age, and const Emily equal to 20. So when I'm logging here, I can say Sophie greater than Emily. So when I save this, I should see a false because Sophie is 10 and Emily is 20. And I am checking, is Sophie greater than Emily? So the answer is false. But if I change this to less than, I should say true, because we know definitely 10 is less than 20. So in JavaScript, we have an equality operator to check left and right if they are equal. So we use 3 equal signs. And if we want to assign, this is called an assignment operator, only 1 equal sign. So we save this and you can see it's going to be false. So these are conditional operators in JavaScript, and these are the primitive types in JavaScript. Now, the next thing that we will look at are the reference types. And the reference types, they're not hard to understand. So the first reference types that we're going to look at are called arrays. Now, arrays are a way of storing data sequentially, and this data usually it's supposed to be of the same type. For example, if you're storing an array of strings or an array of boolean or an array of number, but JavaScript is a dynamic programming language and it accepts any data type that you put in an array. Let me show you. So const ages, and you give it the square brackets. Now the square brackets is what is called an array literal. Anywhere you see square brackets, you should know this is an array. This is just an array of ages of some students. So 12, 10, 20, and 15. And I'm gonna save this. So I'll just console.log ages. And when I save this, you should notice a difference in a way the console is outputting this array. Initially, it was just one value, but as you can see in this case, it's having it in the array literal, and it's giving you all the entire values of this array. This is the values of the array, and if you notice, it has 0, 1, 2, and 3. And these are what is called the index of the array. So in memory, we can access a specific array. For example, if I only want to access index 1, which is the value 10. How do I access this? So arrays have an array literal in front of them, and I give it the value of the index. Remember, this is the index. I am not assigning anything to this array, but I am calling the index of this array. An array indexes start from 0, 1, 2, and 3. And for example, we have 4 items in this array. We can count them as 1, 2, 3, 4, but indexes start from 0. This is very important to understand. So if I want to access the second element of the array, remember arrays start at 0, so I'll start counting from 12 is my index 0 and 10 is at index 1. So I'll put here 1, and when I save this, I should only see 10, because in memory I am only accessing the value of the index at position 1, and that is 10. If I want to access 20, I'll give this as 2. That is how you access arrays in memory. I'll just give this 2, and I can access another element, maybe 15, save this, and I'll see undefined, because this array, it could scale to up to 15 values, but at the value 15, we still don't have anything. So this is the index 15, not the number 15. If I want to access the element 15, I will put here 3, and I will access 15. But at the 15th index, okay, maybe this is confusing. Let me use 14. At the 14th index, there is nothing yet in memory that defines that value at the 14th index. And remember when I mentioned that initially JavaScript variables are undefined. If you don't initialize them, it's going to be undefined. Like in this case, at the 14th index, we don't have a value there, so it's going to be undefined. Okay, so if I want to access the number 20, I will give it a 2, and when I save this 2, that means I am accessing the value at index number 2. And this could be anything. For example, I could change this to Abu, and when I save this, I will access Abu. So in other programming languages, arrays only take values of the same data type, but JavaScript is a dynamic programming language, so you can give it a string, you can give it a boolean, for example, and it will not complain. Normally, it's a good programming practice to define your arrays using the same data type. So I'll just return this to number data type, and arrays are just sequentially in memory. These values are next to each other. So we have 0 index, 1, up to the nth index. And in the console, it's even showing me the length of this array. So these arrays have certain properties that come with it. Just like we saw console.log has many other properties, arrays the same way have many properties that come with it. Let me show you. We have a few properties like ages dot. I can see there are many properties that come with it. Don't worry about these many other properties. I just want you to worry about one property, the length. Like you must have guessed, I can get the length of this array. If I came down here, ages.length, I should get the length of this array. So when I save this, I should get 4. If I increase another value here, maybe 17, I should get 5. This length property just gives me the length of that specific array. So the next reference type that we're going to look at is the object. Now, objects in JavaScript come as a key value pair. For example, a person has a name, age, height, hair color. So we don't want to have all of this in memory by saying const person, hair color, and then give it a string of a hair color like this. We can have all of this bundled in an object. Let me show you. So constant person, and we use curly braces for an object. So this curly braces is what is called an object literal. This is how we declare an object in JavaScript. This person has a name, and this is how we work with objects. So this person's name is Abu, and comma, and the next property of this person is the age. This person has an age of 50, and the next property of this person is height. Person has a height of 1.85 meters. So as you can see, we have declared one variable called person, but this person has many properties. So anything that has properties, you can declare it in an object. So console.log person. When we save this, what do we get on the console? Unlike an array had an index of 0, 1, 2, 3 up to the nth value. But if you log person, we have the age, and we have the height, and we have the name. What if we want to access the age only? We have two ways of doing this. We have the dot notation. For example, I can say person dot, and as you can see, it gives me all the properties that this person has. Person dot age. So when I save this, I should only see 50. And I can say person dot name. When I save this, I should see Abu. So you can access a specific property of this person object. So there's another way of doing this, and that is called the bracket notation. And for example, I can put this in brackets, and I say, okay, name, and I save this, I should see Abu, and I say age, I should see 50. Someone might ask me, okay, Abu, why should we use this sort of way of accessing the specific properties? The easiest way of accessing properties is obviously the dot notation. So if I say person.name and .height, I can still access it. But there's sometimes you might write this code, but you don't know the property that is going to be accessed until the runtime of that application. So this is where we can use the bracket notation. Let me show you. For example, let's say at runtime we have be equal to, for example, at runtime a user will enter something. Let's say they enter name. So if we want to access this value that the user enters at runtime, and then we just call here property. So if a user enters property, and then we display the property that they have selected that they want to see. So when I save this, I should see Abu. And we can also change the value of this property. For example, person.age, I want to give it 60. What happens when I save this? You see, I have changed the value of this age to 60. So we still use the dot notation to first access that specific property, and then we assign a new value to that property. And then we can also add a new property to this person object. For example, hair color. So person dot hair color equals to red. And I log my person object, I should see a new property to this person, and that is the hair color is equals to red. So this is how you can add properties to specific objects. You can add another property. So person dot location, and you can say this person is in Germany. And when I save this, I should see another property that has been added to this person called location. So these are objects in JavaScript. A very, very interesting way of storing data. So the next reference type is just as important, and these are functions. So functions in JavaScript are declared, like you must have guessed. You just call the function and you give it a name. For example, student. And you have to add a parenthesis in front of it and you use the curly braces, and this is how you declare a function. Anything inside this parenthesis is the body of this function. So this is the name of the function, and then we have the body of the function. Now in the body of the function, you can perform whatever calculation you need. You can perform anything that you need inside this body. For example, I just want to console.log. The student's name is Mark. So how do we access this function? This is just a function and it has a body, and we've console.log, and in this log we want to say hello Mark. How do we access this function then? Because in the console there's nothing, although here we have written console.log, but it's not logging anything in our console. The reason is that we have defined the function and it has a body, but we have not called this function. So we're just gonna come down and call the function student and empty parenthesis, and we save this, and now this calls the function here student, and now we see hello Mark. Example, we can say hello Susan. So when you save this, we see hello Susan because we are calling the function here. In a function, there is what we call arguments of a function and then parameters of a function. For example, we had coded here Susan. What if we want to pass this name here to this function? For example, we want to pass the name Alan to this function. How do we do that? Now, when you are declaring a function, anything that is put inside the parenthesis is the argument of that function. So we're going to say name. So this is the argument to this function. So when we are calling this function, it expects an argument. Let's save this and see what happens. It's still going to say hello Susan. So we have this argument that we are passing to this function. And now instead of Susan, we want to log that name that we're going to pass dynamically into that function. So we're going to call name here because this name is the one that is going to replace with the value that you're going to pass through that function. So when we log this, we're going to see hello undefined because we called this function down here, but we didn't pass a parameter. Now this confuses even some programmers. There's a difference between an argument of a function and a parameter of that function. The argument is the variable that you pass when defining the function, but the argument is the value that you pass when declaring that function. So in this case, I'm gonna say Susan, and when I save this, I should see hello Susan because we are passing a parameter to this function that is taken by that argument when defining the function, and then it's passed onto the specific place where that argument is used. So I can call this function multiple times. Again, that's another value of a function. You can use it multiple times. So this time I'm gonna pass Abu. So when I save this, I should see two instances where this function is used. We have hello Susan and hello Abu. So we have reused the same function twice. You can use it as many times as you want. I can even have another one and I say Alan. So when I save this, I should see 3 instances of that function. So this is how functions work. And functions are very, very important in programming. But then again, this is an introduction to JavaScript. We shall not go deeper into functions. We also have 2 types of functions. There are functions that perform a specific task like this one. But what if I have a function and I say number? So I'll comment this out. I want to find the square of this number. I'll say number times number. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the return keyword. So this return keyword, it just means that this number times number is returned to whoever is calling this function. I'm not logging this number times number. All I'm doing is I am returning it to whoever is calling this function. So if I want to use this, I'll pass a number, maybe 10, and I can save this, but I'll still not see anything. Let me get rid of these other 2 lines. But what happens when I console.log this student function here with the number 10? I should see 100 because this is now being called twice. The student function is called and then this log function is also called. So I'll get 100. And we can assign a function to a variable. For example, I'll say const square equals to student and I'll pass a value, maybe 20. And I can call square. And when I save this, I should see 400. So a function is a first-class citizen, meaning that in JavaScript, we can use a function just like how we use variables. I can pass it to a variable, I can declare a variable and assign a function to that variable. This is how we use the second way of calling functions. Now we have another way of declaring a function. Like I told you, I'm going to show you the old way of writing JavaScript code and then also the new way of writing JavaScript code. So this is the old way of writing JavaScript code. You'll still see the syntax, but not so much. So the new way of writing this JavaScript code is, we can say constant. Here I'm going to say teacher equals and then parenthesis. And then I'm going to give this what is called the arrow function. So this is called the arrow function syntax. And just like the first one, we have the name of the function and then we have the argument of that function. So I'll just start by logging to the console. Hello, Abu. So save this and I will call this hello Abu the same way. Instead of consoling this, I will call teacher. Save this. I should see hello Abu. So the same way, just as this one, the first one, the only difference is that I can give this as a constant, and this is the modern way of declaring functions. So next time you see someone's project files, don't be so surprised when you see a syntax like this. They are just declaring a function, but this is the modern way of declaring JavaScript functions. Just as the first one, I can have here an argument, for example, name. I will have here hello plus name, and then if I save this, I'll still see the same hello undefined, and then I have to pass here a name, for example Abu. When I save this, I should see hello Abu. They both work the same way. I can also use the return keyword here on this other one. The body of both functions is just the same. So I think we've spent so much time on these types, so we need to move on to the next part of this tutorial, and that is the conditional programming. Now, conditions is one of the biggest fundamentals that you have to understand in JavaScript, and these are statements like the if statement, and then we have else, and then we have the switch statement. Basically what happens is that you're going to write if, and then this is the condition in here. For example, if this is true, do something, and if it's true, let me just console.log true, and I save this. If this condition is true, then execute the body of that conditional statement. So the conditional statement has the condition down here, and then we have the body of that statement also down here. And in most cases, you will see the else that goes with the if. So I'll just console.log false. So if the first part of the if statement is false, then the else part is going to execute. For example, so if this is false, what do? We're going to execute down here. Let's just declare a few variables here. I'll say const John, and I'll say 10, and const Jane, and I'll say 20. If John is greater than Jane, I want you to execute this piece of code. So as you can see, John is not greater than Jane. So what happened? The else part executed. As you can see, it's logging false to the console. So meaning that John is not greater than Jane. So this is a false. So this true part of the if state will not execute. What if I change this to less than? I should say true, because the condition here is true. So the true part of this if statement is going to execute, and the else part, which will execute if this part is false, has not been executed. So we shall not cover switch statement in this tutorial, because the switch is not used in many cases, and I don't want to confuse you right now. So just take it that even the switch statement is also a condition in JavaScript. So we can move on to the next part, and that is loops. So we have three types of loops in JavaScript. We have the for loop, we have the while loop, and we have the do while loop. This do while loop is not used many times, so I will only look at the for loop and the while loop. They basically work the same way. So for example, let's start with while loop. So I'll show you how to use a while loop. I'll define a variable here and I'll call it control, and this is what is going to control when this loop executes or when it stops executing. So for example, control equals to 0. Just like the if statement, the while has a condition that you give it, and it should tell this while loop if it should continue executing or not. So while control is less than 10, as long as the value of control is less than 10, it should continue executing this part of the loop. So console log hello. If I just left it this way, this loop will never end. It will keep executing forever because control will always be less than 10. So what we need to do here is we need to increment the value of control. So control equals to control plus 1. I want you to realize what I've done here. So I took the value of control. Remember, I used the let. This means that we can change its value. So control that is here, and it's gonna be the one used here, and will be equal to the previous value of control plus 1. So for example, control is initially 0. So this is the new value of control is gonna be 0 plus 1, which is 1. So it comes and tests. So the new value of control is 1, and it checks. Is 1 less than 10? Yes. So it will execute this line. The new value of control is going to be 1 plus 1, and it comes and checks, which is 2. So this value is now 2, and it checks. So this will continue until 10, and it checks. Is 10 less than 10? No, which is false. 10 is equal to 10. So this part will not execute, and this loop will exit. Let's run this and see. So Control S, and you'll see hello has been printed 10 times. You see the value behind here, 10. If I said here 20, let me save this. I should see the value here has changed to 20 because the same thing that I've just been explaining has executed 20 times. And then when it checks, when control is now 20 and 20 is not less than 20, and it will exit this body of the loop. That is how the while loop works. So I'll just comment this out, and to save memory, I will also comment everything out, and I can show you the for loop. Now the for loop, just like the while loop, it also needs a condition for it to either continue looping or to stop looping. So for example, let I be equal to 0. Now here you will notice that I can declare a variable and initialize it in the for loop. So inside the for loop, we have the value that's going to use for testing, and then the condition, and then increment or decrement. So this is the value that we've just declared. So this is the condition. So if I is less than 10, and then the increment or decrement, we can just say I plus plus. This is also a way of incrementing a variable in JavaScript. You can just put 2 plus signs in front of it. Or you can say the previous way, I equals to I plus 1. It's still allowed. The same thing, it's still okay. So then we come to the body of this loop. What are we going to do? Console.log hello. When I save this, I should see hello has been executed 10 times. So this is another for loop. Many times you're going to use a for loop while you're working with an array. For example, we have an array. Let me declare an array. Constant array equal to a bunch of values, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I want to print on the console all these values of the array. I could as well say console.log array at index 1, and I say array at index 2. So if I save this, I should see 3, 4, which is okay. Let me also just add here array at index 0. So I see 2, 3, 4. That is index 0, 1, and 2. But let's imagine you have an array that is 1,000 characters. You cannot do console.log array at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 999. There's no way you can do that. It's very tedious and you're prone to errors. So this is where if you want to console.log values of the array, we can use the for loop for this. Let me show you. So I'll just comment this out, or I can just delete it. We don't need it actually. So I have an array and I want to log all its elements in the console. So I will use the for loop for this. So let I be equal to 0. I'll initialize this, but I want I to be less than array dot, remember we have the length property, array dot length. So as soon as this array reaches the value of the length, you should stop executing. So console.log array at index I. Remember, an index starts from 0 and I is going to start from 0 here. So the first value of I is going to be 0. This part here will run, array is going to be 0, and it checks, is I less than array.length? The answer is yes, because I is just 0. So it executes this and then increments the value of I to 1. Then it comes and checks again, is 1 less than array.length? Yes. So it executes and comes and increments this to 1 plus 1, that is 2. So it executes, remember the value of array changes to 2. So when I save this, I should see 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, which are the exact values of the array up here. So the for loop is important in a way. We can use it to iterate over the array. If an array has only 2 values, we can say console.log at index 0, index 1. But if the array has 1,000 values, you cannot do that. For example, let me just copy this a couple of times. Control C, Control V, Control V, Control V, Control V. So there are many values that I've just copied into this array. So when I save it, as you can see, it's going to print on the console all of them because of this array.length property here of an array. So it will keep testing if the value of this I has reached the maximum number of the array. And this I is going to hold the number of the index of that specific array. That's why we see on the console, it will print all the values of the array. So with loops comes the end of our introduction to JavaScript course. And I hope you can use all of this knowledge to actually start understanding how JavaScript works. And you can just Google a few projects online and you should find some beginner projects to do with JavaScript, and it should get you started with JavaScript. But these are the basics, and I've shown you all the old syntax and the new syntax of working with JavaScript. And by now you should be comfortable with the beginner JavaScript projects that you can find online. So with this comes to an end of this tutorial. And remember to stay hungry and stay foolish. See you on the next one.